Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is Gigi Smile. This is my review of season 1, episode 6. Please know this will contain spoilers, and as usual, I will not compare the book to the show. This episode focuses on two separate timelines, the past and the present, and we find out how Lydia became Aunt Lydia. On this video, I will concentrate on the past, and in part two, I will talk about the present. We first see Lydia in the school teacher's lounge with a few other teachers and a man who appears to be the principal of the school. The school has been canceled again for the fourth time this month. And you hear one of the teachers say, "It's fine by me, my classroom is a mess." And it's a reminder how society can ignore warning signs. And we hear this in The Handmaid's Tale from June when she talks about how they were asleep before, and in the final episode, when she tells her mom that she always knew she was always fighting because she could see what was coming, and June never did. And that reminds me of this, how sometimes we see clearly what's in front of us and just choose to ignore. I noticed that Lydia looks very different to what we saw in The Handmaid's Tale, where she was wearing a very tight bun and no makeup. And in this past scene, we see that she is wearing makeup, her hair is loose, and she's casually dressed. But we do see that stern demeanor that we're familiar with because Lydia complains about the empty coffee container, and she complains to a visibly pregnant staff member. She wants to know whose turn it was to bring the coffee, and the teacher says that it's Vivian's turn. And a moment later, Vivian does walk in, and I was surprised to see who Vivian is because we know her as Aunt Vidala. Vivian does look terrified when she walks into the teacher's lounge, and she announces that there are armed men outside and they want to talk to Keith. And he goes out to talk to them for a brief moment. And the women want to know what's happening, so they all gather and watch through the door window. And it seems to me that whatever is being said to Keith, he extends his hand out, like in the way that we sometimes do when we're trying to diffuse a situation, and he is immediately shot. The women are all gathered and forcibly taken to the stadium, and they're still shocked by what happened to Keith. Once they're at the stadium, we see hundreds of women that have all been gathered at that same time, and all of their belongings are taken. We can see that there are women being separated in a very aggressive manner. They are separating the pregnant women, the clearly gay women, and they are also separating what appears to be young and probably fertile women, and they're all being forced in different directions, left and right, and kind of brings back a little bit of what we know in our history. The guardian is standing in front of Lydia's pregnant coworker, and he's got some kind of a dossier in front of him, and he knows that she is an unmarried pregnant woman. And there's a lot of judgment in the way that he says it. And she says, "I have a partner." But it shows how well prepared they were because they had so much personal information on so many of these women, if not all of them. So the remaining hundreds of women are all seated in the stadium. And Lydia says that it was clear that there was a coup. They suddenly see some of the women that were removed when they arrived being paraded onto the field by armed guardians. And we hear an announcement about sinful women, and probably the first time that Lydia has heard the term by his hand. They watched the first of many executions as the blindfolded women that were just paraded onto the field are shot by firing squad. So the appears that the women are there for days, and more are arriving to the stadium all the time. Executions are continuing as women are being pulled out of their seats very aggressively with a lot of violence. Some of them end up being paraded out to be executed. We see that there's a loaf of bread that's handed out by the guardian and it's given to each row, and they're all told to take one slice. So they're getting very little food. And the women are also out in the elements. We see Lydia's face getting sunburned. And at one point, we do see that they are, at least to me, they have run out of hope. We hear Vivian say to Lydia that she was a good teacher. Lydia says, "You were too." They're using all past tense. So the impression is that they are prepared to die. So Lydia wakes up and is shocked that Vivian is gone. She desperately looks around for her, but doesn't see her. And the woman sitting in front says, "I'm sorry about your friend." And that brought me a flashback of June and Emily. When Emily says this to June, she says, "I'm sorry about your friend," when June thinks that Moira is dead. Lydia is then yanked out of her seat and taken to the Commander Judd, who is in charge of deciding where all of the women fit into this new world that they're creating. And while she's walking to him, being led by the Guardians, we see trays upon trays of all the confiscated personal items that they took from the women. But when Lydia meets Judd, it's clear that she is determined to survive. Lydia has been thinking about her options and strategies for a while, as she has been watching the executions and she hears the announcements about sinful women not following God's word. So she understands, or she at least has some idea of what she's dealing with. And she narrates that men who understand the power of women and want to control it are the most terrifying. So when she meets with Judd, Lydia still maintains her composure. She is speaking forcefully. And I noticed that he has many boxes behind him, which apparently contain all the dossiers of all the women that are still remaining at the stadium. And he is holding Lydia's dossier. And we find out, surprisingly, that Lydia had an abortion, which is now punishable by death retroactively. And she doesn't make excuses. She just says, "I was very young." She doesn't ask for forgiveness. She doesn't do any of that. But she does state the fact that she was young. And instead of begging for her life, she comes up with the plan that all bosses love. Anyone who has any work experience knows this. What do bosses love? And that is the saying of, "Here is what I can do for you." Here is where we find out that the AND program came from Lydia. And it sounds good to Judd. He has more important things to focus on, as Lydia says. Why not let a specific group of women shape the girls into the women these men want? She reminds him that delegating is a virtue, not a flaw. And if women are to be truly separate, then they should be guided by women. Now, this concept isn't new. It reminds me of the current women who run large organizations and have power that are on TV today telling other women that their place is in the home, married, and having babies. So, this idea very much appeals to Judd. Lydia leaves the meeting with Judd. and a guardian takes her to the locker room where soup and fresh clothes are waiting for her. So she knows that she has a chance of survival. But Judd needs to test Liddy. She is summoned to the field. Judd asks if she is ready to prove herself to the cause, and she says yes. Then he shows her the gun. And that's when she realizes that there's another firing squad happening and that she must murder one of the women to prove her loyalty. And she pleads against it. Her initial reaction is to plead to find another way. But he says something that we have all heard in recent times. If you're not with us, then you're against us. So Lydia takes the gun and very, very slowly walks onto the field, praying for God to help her. And she stands next to one of the guardians, right in front of the woman she has to murder, and she sees Vivian. And she's shocked, absolutely shocked. And she looks at Judd, and he is just watching her. And she can't believe that she has to do this. But Lydia knows that if she doesn't do this, she won't live. And Vivian, who we know as Aunt Vidala, is pleading with her, begging for her not to kill her. So when we hear the command by his hand, she does shoot. So all of the women fall to the ground except for Vivian. And so we find out that the gun either had blanks or was unloaded. And Lydia is again stunned that Vivian is alive. She fully begins to understand what Judd did. So he got her loyalty, but he also had Vivian's loyalty because she too had a plan to survive. Whatever that plan was, we don't know. We didn't see it, but she also had a plan. And now Vivian knows that Lydia was willing to kill her. And I wonder how that affects their relationship in future episodes, especially with Judd's offer to replace Lydia with Vidala in the last episode. So, having proven loyalty, Judd has Lydia pick the fabric and the design of the uniform for their new disciples, or what we know as ants. And that was very surprising that Lydia not only had the idea of the ants, even though they weren't called ants at that time, and she also came up with the concept for the uniform that they wear. That was very, very surprising to me. As usual, I really loved this episode. Please join me for my part two when I discuss the present portion of the timeline. Take care.